people would be terrified. It's so humiliating. He would say things that you look more ridiculous than usual, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, or people think that we care what the honourable gentleman thinks, and the fact is we don't. And it was just awful, awful, awful bullying from the chair. And I loathed it. I loathe bullies. And so, I can say that now. This is great to be saying this. Thanks, Matt.
Andrea Leadsom, welcome to your exit interview. A chance for us both to learn what you could have done better. You've been Conservative MP for South Northamptonshire since 2010. So the first obvious question is, why are you leaving?
Well, there's a long story and a short story. The short story is Northampton Saints rugby side won the Premiership on Saturday, and I was there cheering them on, and Courtney Laws, captain and captain of England, is stepping down. So I thought, well, if he's going to, why not me?
Right. What's the longer version?
Okay.
Is it you read the polls?
No, it's actually, I've had 14 years, as you've rightfully pointed out. And when I went into politics, I had my 3 Bs. You might remember this, Matt. Babies,
I remember babies.
Banks.
And
what was the third?
Brexit.
Well, it was actually Brussels back in the day. It kind of renamed itself in around 2016. So when I first came in, banks was what it was all about. I'd had 25 years in finance. I wanted to see better regulation. I wanted to see the banks who fiddled with LIBOR punished, and indeed they were. And so I was on the Treasury Committee and then City Minister. And so that was banks. And then Brussels, well, we're probably going to talk about that,
we'll come
aren't we?
to that.
And babies is my real passion. For the last 28 years, I've been passionate about giving every baby the best start for life. Been working on that through my time in politics. We've launched these family hubs and Start for Life programme, rolling them out across England. As we speak, I am the Minister for Babies. And I just feel, I want to go and focus more on babies, but outside of the political front line. So that's why. And 14 years is a long time. I have a lot of T-shirts.
How does it work with you still being a minister during election campaign where you're standing down?
I know,
Are you still
it's weird.
going?
Yeah, I'm still a minister.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite frustrating in itself, actually. So my responsibility is primary care, public health and Start for Life. And so straight after the election was called, I had a meeting with each of the key teams in Department for Health and was basically told by the civil servants, no, sorry, Minister, we can't actually really talk about anything. We can't do any policy thinking. We can't make any decisions. So therefore, really, the role of minister is just in terms of if something is a crisis. And we have had a couple of mini things. So there was a hacking issue which impacted on organ donation, which comes under my portfolio, for example. And those things I've been able to deal with. But in terms of the day-to-day, big frustration for me. We've done so well with our dentistry recovery plan, and I was really trying to make progress on that. And then with things like consultations with GPs on the way forward to make GPs happier, more motivated. And then, of course, with the Best Start for Life, we were about to publish a progress report. And so it's been a bit frustrating, to be honest.
If only you knew who called the election early, you could have
given them a call and asked them not to.
And asked them not to.
Yeah, I should have done that. Good point, Matt.
Do you think it was the right decision to call the election when he did?
It's such a difficult issue, isn't it? That is who knows? For me personally, I would have liked a bit longer because I kind of felt I was just getting there with so many things. So that's a personal frustration. But from a big picture point of view, which is what the Prime Minister has to look at, he obviously felt that now was the time to go to the country. And, I can totally understand that you don't want to sort of look as if you're just hanging on in there to the last minute. So, I can see reasons for calling it when he did.
How do you think, with the benefit of being slightly detached from it, you're not standing yourself, how do you think the campaign is going for the Conservatives and for Rishi Sunak?
Well, I think that launching the manifesto at Silverstone, in the heart of South Northamptonshire, was an absolutely inspired idea. Right. And I think the
is
messaging...
he in pole position, though, do you think?
Well, he obviously isn't in pole position at the moment, according to the polls. However, don't let's forget, I was around back in 2017 where we had a 20-point lead that dwindled away to a hung parliament, don't we know it? And that was an incredibly torrid time, really, really difficult parliament. And that was, started very differently to where it ended up. And I actually think the launch yesterday was incredibly positive. So, the three big themes, one was tax cuts, really important. People have really felt the cost of living crisis. Secondly is stopping the small boats. Rishi's absolute pledge, those planes to Rwanda will be taking off if we win the next election. And Keir Starmer sort of says, we'll smash the gangs, which is, as Rishi said, it's a slogan, it's not a plan. So if you want those...
Stop the boats is not a slogan, is it?
Well, no, but we have a plan that backs it up. I mean, that is the key point. There is a very, very well costed, established and, all at the point of being rolled out plan to stop those small boats, to have that big deterrent that will stop people taking that horrendous, life-threatening journey. And then, of course, the really key bit is the defence of our country. And, now we're in a very difficult position globally. We've seen huge change, a war in Europe. We've had Iran firing weapons at Israel, and only reason it wasn't a complete disaster is because they were shot out the sky by US and UK forces. So, we are in a very difficult position globally, and it's only the Conservatives that will commit to that 2.5% of GDP spent on defence.
Well, let's not bog down too much of that. I mean, I suppose what I would say is that over the last 18 months of Rishi Sunak being Prime Minister, he's made all those points and more repeatedly, and yet the polls still suggest he's going to lead the Conservatives to potentially an unprecedented defeat. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of reasons. I mean, I think, interestingly, I was looking at the numbers just recently, and in current prices, the Second World War cost the UK economy around £400 billion. In current prices, COVID cost the UK economy about £400 billion. And of course, after the Second World War, there was a backlash against those who'd sort of presided over that huge expenditure. And then, of course, that money had to be recouped. And so that's where we are. We've seen massive inflation thanks to Putin's invasion. So we have seen a cost of living crisis. People say it's all about the economy, stupid. And therefore, we have to recognise that, post-COVID, post all of the problems that we've had with no dentists, no doctor's appointments during COVID, the recovery is difficult. We've not seen productivity recover in the public sector. So all of that is now laid at the door of Conservatives, totally understandably, but just at a point where the economy is recovering, inflation's halved, it's back to normal levels. It's much less than half what it was at the peak. We're seeing real wages rising. We've not seen a huge raft of unemployment. So now we're at a point where people would start to feel better. But of course, we're also at a point where we need to call a general election. So I just think it's a combination of those things where people very obviously turn against the government of the day if they are not feeling well off in their own pocket.
Let's talk about one of your Bs, because it strikes me there are very sort of sliding doors moments in your career. If Britain hadn't voted to leave, what difference would that be making to people's lives right now? Because there's been lots of political turmoil, there's been economic turmoil, in part because of Ukraine and COVID and all of that. Is there something that you can tell listeners now is better about their life because the UK voted to leave the EU?
So many things, yes. I mean,
I'll real life one.
Yeah, okay.
If you get up in the morning, you're busy and you've got kids or work or whatever it is, how is a listener's life better now that we're outside the EU?
Okay, so there are so many things. So one thing is the potential for free trade around the world, which we didn't have as part of the EU.
But if you're an individual, the potential.
If you're an individual
person.
So our vaccination post-COVID, we were the first out of lockdown because we had the ability to approve our own vaccination, to vaccinate the population fastest, I think, apart from Israel it's a much smaller country. We were the first to be able to vaccinate the whole population, so to get out of lockdown. So that would be something that affected every single person in this country. What that has led to is the fact that our economy is growing faster than most European nations.
No, it's not. It's flat. In the last quarter, in the last month, the most recent figures we've just had out, it hasn't grown at all.
Although the economy is growing, albeit slightly, but you look at European economies that are actually still contracting. I mean, just today there's a big article in the Telegraph about the disaster that is Germany's economy, which has always been the absolute powerhouse of Europe. You know, we have the fact that the UK has managed to avoid the costs of paying for the COVID lockdown in Europe. You know, we were one of the biggest contributors to EU funds, wherever they were, structural and cohesion funds, the building back funds after various EU disasters. You look at global mass migration, we think it's bad here. Look at mainland Europe. You know, why are all of those countries going to the polls, seeing a rise in right-wing politics? And that is because of unchecked mass migration. The UK doesn't have it as badly as many do.
Mass migration, though. Under Conservative governments, we've had record levels of net migration, of legal net migration.
We absolutely have.
We took back control of our borders, and we've let record numbers of people in.
Yes, and the fact of the matter is that 150,000 of the 600,000 were Ukrainian refugees. I don't think anybody argued against that at the time. 140,000, I think, were Hong Kong Chinese refugees who we had a commitment to under pre-existing arrangements when China took over Hong Kong. And what we've seen is, yes, we allowed significant numbers of legal migrants to come to this country for specific roles. And what we've done now is to significantly row back on that, to limit the number of dependents, to increase the income that you need to have to be able to come to this country. We require you to have an immigrant surcharge so that you're contributing to the NHS, and so on and so on. So yes, totally agree. Legal migration has been extremely high, but for very good reasons, and in a way that the UK government is now putting a stop to. So
was it a mistake to say you were going to bring it down to tens of thousands? You're going to take back control. We were going to bring immigration down.
No, because we have taken back control.
But you take back control and then you've let net
yes,
over 700,000 people in 12 months.
Yes.
700,000 more people came here than left.
Yes, exactly.
That's not control.
And it was a mistake to talk about tens of thousands because it didn't predict Ukrainian situation. It didn't predict the Hong Kong situation. And also it was a decision by the government because of key worker roles that were needed, shortages that were there in the UK economy, to allow people to come to this country to fulfill those roles. So what was the problem was the tens of thousands, but it is the fact that we have taken back control of our money, our laws and our borders. And so the government is taking steps to control. And in fact, part of our manifesto is to have a vote in Parliament every year that has a hard stop on the number of migrants that will be able to come to this country. If we were still in the EU, we would not be able to do that.
Well, obviously, let's go back then to so the first sliding door is if we'd voted to stay, and you've given some ways you think it's better that we didn't.
There's so many ways.
Is there a sliding door? No, because I think they were a bit vague. There was another sliding door moment. If you hadn't pulled out of the leadership race in 2016, and as a Brexiteer, a committed, public, enthusiastic proponent of Brexit, you'd have probably won. If we've seen what's happened in amongst membership votes since then, you'd have probably won. Do you think about that moment, the sliding doors moment, where you did become Prime Minister and maybe found it easier to deliver Brexit than Theresa May did?
So what I obviously think about it a lot because people always raise it with me. Everybody raises it with me. And a lot of people say, we wish you had become Prime Minister. But, you know, frankly, with the information I had at the time, if that was facing me now, I would still make the same decision. And there were two reasons, really, two key reasons. The first one was that I was extremely concerned about the economy. Having had, as I say, 25 years in financial services before coming into politics, I was really concerned about what we saw recently with Liz Truss, which was that somebody that a lot of people were very concerned about, somebody who'd only been a junior minister, hadn't even been in cabinet, wasn't that well known apart from Brexit, that there might be a bit of a run. And that was the thing that concerned me, was that me in charge would not give the country and therefore the international markets the confidence that they wanted. So that was one reason. The second reason, which was, if anything, even more vital, is that I had 84 MPs backing me to 199 backing Theresa. So in effect, with only a 12-seat majority, if I had stood, and as you say, I think probably I would have won, but what many colleagues had said is they would resign the whip. That would destroy our majority, and that could potentially put us into second referendum, which again, even if the markets weren't worried about me, they would then be worried about a second referendum. So I could not see a way in which me becoming Prime Minister was in the country's interest. So, believe it or not, that is why I stood down, and that's why, if I had my time again, I would make the same decision.
Some people hear that, then they'll think a Brexiteer admitting that a Brexiteer in charge of Brexit would have crashed the economy isn't a ringing endorsement of Brexit.
No, but that's not what I'm saying, is it? What I'm saying is that, Theresa May absolutely guaranteed to me, before I told her I would withdraw, she absolutely guaranteed to me that she would fulfil the will of the people. She had been Home Secretary for 4 or 5 years. She'd been in Cabinet and Shadow Cabinet forever. She did have the confidence and the votes of MPs, and she said she would leave the EU. Now, nobody knew at that moment in time just how impossible it would become to leave the EU. So it wasn't a case of should a Brexiteer be Prime Minister or should a Remainer be Prime Minister. At that point, that wasn't the issue. That became an issue later on, of course, which is why Boris did so well. But at the time, it wasn't a question of what your vote should have been in order to qualify you to leave the EU. It was that it needed to be the person that the economy and the MPs would feel most comfortable with.
You talked about Boris, and obviously he pulled out because Michael Gove ran against him in his whole campaign.
Yeah.
But you had a sort of cameo in that whole scene, didn't you? Because you were going to be Boris Johnson's running mate. You were supposed to be getting a letter and reassurances.
Yeah. So actually, in my sort of rewriting of history moments, that in that time, Boris had offered me to be one of the top 3. So the top 3 jobs were going to be obviously Prime Minister, Chancellor, and the person who takes us out of the EU. And, basically that was going to be me, Michael and Boris, and that was what Boris had undertaken to do. And that's what didn't happen on that fateful night where I basically said, right, well, I'm going to put my hat into the ring. And then, of course, Michael then the next morning said he didn't believe in Boris and was putting his hat into the ring. So I think that evening was a key moment.
Do you think that was the sliding doors moment?
Yeah, I would say that was probably it. I'd not spent the last few years as Theresa had, or indeed as Boris had, or indeed possibly as Michael had, thinking about themselves being Prime Minister. I was relatively new in politics at that point, even so. And so I wasn't sort of thinking, I want to be Prime Minister. I was thinking, I want to get Brexit done. I want to take us out of the EU. This is a huge decision the country's taken. I want to be part of the team that makes this happen. So that would have been what I would have wanted to do. My ideal would have been to be what became known as the Brexit Secretary, but at the time was, the person that would lead us out of the EU.
There's another sliding doors moment, I think, where you then you then ran again in 2019, but then basically threw your weight behind Penny Mordaunt in 2 leadership campaigns. Is there a sliding doors moment where Penny Mordaunt became Prime Minister and we didn't have the Liz Truss Farrago, or even then the Rishi Sunak? Do you think the Conservative Party would be in a better place now if Penny was leader?
I mean, I just think that's unknowable. I mean, obviously, I was her campaign director for the 2...
But you thought 18 months ago she'd do a better job than Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely.
Do you think now, given where we are, would it be better if she were leader?
You can't rewrite history like that. I mean, I think Penny would have been a great Prime Minister and would be a great Prime Minister. I think there's no doubt in my mind and lots of people's minds about that. But I don't think you can sort of rewrite history and say we'd be in a much better position now than we are.
Do you think it'd be worse?
Been... Again, you can't know that for sure, but I have a great regard for Penny. I think she'd make a great Prime Minister.
Another sliding doors moment, when I was looking back over your sort of CV, you put forward the motion to scrap the suspension of Owen Paterson over lobbying, which lots of people see as the seeds were sown of Boris Johnson's ultimate downfall. That caused a huge row amongst Tory MPs. Then came along Partygate and so on. Do you think that was a mistake? Yeah,
so that actually, I mean, in the end, yes, it was a huge mistake. And actually what I put down was a motion to review the workings of the Standards Committee. So I didn't at all put down a motion to review the suspension of Owen Paterson, but to review the Standards Committee processes. So for me, from becoming Leader of the Commons, I'd created this independent complaints and grievance scheme, and I'd been very concerned that the Standards Committee that looks at MPs' behaviour other than bullying and harassment,
which is what you would be
which
dealing
was
with,
what I'd been writing. So the Standards Committee looks at MPs' behaviour other than bullying and harassment. And it seemed to me that the Standards Committee processes didn't enable that MP to argue their case sufficiently, because what it meant is the Parliamentary Commissioner would be both prosecutor and advisor to the committee, which seemed to me against natural justice. And so it was put to me that I might like to put down an amendment to have that reviewed, and it would effectively create a 3-month delay to that decision about Owen Paterson, which personally, I think that wouldn't have made any difference to him whatsoever. And it certainly wasn't to overturn his suspension at all. It was simply to make a much more robust and in line with natural justice system out of the of the Parliamentary Standards Committee. And in fact, ironically, subsequent to that change has been made. So, nobody disagreed with it. But what happened was I thought it would be a thing that the whole House would get behind, because lots of colleagues were worried about it. But of course, because Owen Paterson's case was live at the time, hence permitting the opportunity to put down an amendment. You can't put down an amendment unless there's something live. So they saw it as a political opportunity instead.
It looked like it was an Owen Paterson vehicle.
Yeah.
Let's do some classic exit interview questions. Summing up your former bosses in a word or a shortish phrase. Sum up David Cameron in a word.
Charming. I mean, he was the Prime Minister I knew less.
Is that a positive or...?
No, it's definitely a positive. He was the Prime Minister I knew less well, but possibly, weirdly, more well socially, because when you're a backbencher, when you first start out, you get invited to things. And I remember going to Chequers for a lovely evening there. And so, he was just completely charming, but I was kind of in awe.
You were junior, just coming MP.
Yeah, exactly.
OK, sum up Theresa May in a word.
Honourable. She was probably the Prime Minister I became closest to, because I was Leader of the Commons throughout her, pretty much through her time. And you
hung on till the bitter end in a way that lots of your colleagues didn't.
Exactly. And I got a lot of flack for that. But I really felt, having effectively stood aside to make her Prime Minister, it was my duty to be right next to her, helping her to do this. And so towards the end, we would regularly have a phone call, just the two of us on a Sunday night, to kind of think about what could we do next week to try and get the withdrawal agreement through. And obviously, there was literally no way to do it, but as it turns out. But yes, I stuck it out to the bitter end, right up until the time where I was due to introduce a new version of the withdrawal agreement the following day in Business Question. And in it contained a promise that should the House vote for a second referendum, then a minister would bring forward the necessary legislation. And that, for me, that was the red line. I'd always said I would stick with her until it didn't look like Brexit anymore. And so I rang her and said, look, I'm really sorry, but that, to me, that will win, and therefore will be into second referendum territory. So I'm afraid I have to resign. That
was your red line.
That was my red line.
It's really interesting, that relationship you have, given, we talk about Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, but others, have a big fallout. To have gone from being leadership rivals, and listeners will remember your famous interview with the Times, where you said that as a mother you had more of a stake in the future. But do you think to then go to having nightly chats to try and get things through, is that am I being too simplistic to say men who'd fallen out in that most high-profile, spectacular way wouldn't have forged such a close bond later?
Do you know what? I've never been a man. And so I really can't answer that question.
You've seen quite a lot of them in politics.
I have, yes. I certainly have. And actually, I think, you raised the issue of that interview, and you'll know that I absolutely am clear in my own mind that is exactly not what I said. And it is not what I implied or what I thought. And Theresa and I had that conversation, and she accepted my profuse apology for the way it was portrayed. So the fact of the matter is that Theresa did accept my version of events. And actually, she made me DEFRA secretary, and then she made me Leader of the Commons. And yes, by the end, we had a very collegiate relationship, I think, because we worked together very closely, and she could see that I was determined to stand by her when, quite a lot of Brexiteers just walked away in frustration or, out of temper. So, yes, is that a man thing, a woman thing? I don't really know. I think it's just different personalities. But I think probably both Theresa and I are quite collegiate people.
Yeah.
And also we're very action-focused. We're not kind of like about waffling around, pushing paper. We're both determined to achieve a end result, and that we shared.
Boris Johnson, in a word.
OK, I'm going to go with optimistic.
Overly so?
Well, people will judge. I mean, I think it's great when you have someone who is optimistic in politics. You need someone who is, politics is to a large extent about selling dreams. You need people to see a vision for how things can be if they stick with you. And I think Boris did that incredibly well.
Liz Truss, in a word.
Tough. I think whatever people think of her, she's weathered. I mean, I kind of cringe when I see some of the flack that she's had, and arguably deservedly. But she is sure tough.
But even now, she seems to invite the flack.
Vaguely, yeah, I don't get it. I mean, she is my intake. And
you arrived together in the Commons at the same time.
Exactly, in 2010. And we did have a group of a sort of dining club that lots of people have.
Yeah.
And we had a dining club of people that we individually, early doors, thought could potentially be in the cabinet. And there was a group of us, and actually we all were in the cabinet.
So it's you and Liz. Who else?
Well, I mean, Saj, Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng, Chris Eaton-Harris. Crikey, now you're really... Therese Coffey.
But when you sat and looked around the table, did you think that Liz Truss was the one who was going to get to number 10?
No, because not particularly, not for any hostile reason, but just that actually what I more think is, isn't it funny that in a way, those early instincts, you could sort of pick out which people were on a particular mission or who just seemed quite good, quite effective, And
then, of course, Rishi Sunak, in a word.
I would say smart. He is a really smart guy. I'd say honourable if it weren't for the fact that that's outweighed by smart. I think he's a really good, honest, decent person whose heart's in the right place, and he's really smart. Yesterday I was really impressed at Silverstone. Can I just say that again? In my constituency. Yeah, no, I think he really did. When it came to question time at the end of his speech about the manifesto, I thought he was so over the detail. He got some really hostile questions from the press, and he just answered them brilliantly well with just such a level of detail. He's a seriously smart guy.
The one other person I want to ask you to sum up in a word is somebody you probably dealt with more than lots of those prime ministers. John Bercow, in a word.
Do you know, it starts with a B and it goes star, 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 star. OCKS, can I spell? No. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Do you get... Yeah. Anyway, that's it, really.
You still in touch?
Do you know what? We're not. Do you know, I haven't had a Christmas card from him in that many a long time, and nor's he from me.
I think I've told you this before, but the most spectacular thing I've ever seen in the House of Commons was the day it was at PMQs. Jeremy Corbyn had been accused of calling Theresa May a stupid woman or mouthing it across the dispatch box. John Bercow said, well, I'm sure if he has, he'll apologise. And you got up to the dispatch box and said, well, you didn't apologise when you called me a stupid woman.
Yeah.
And the place erupted.
It was so funny. It was so funny. And actually, what no one saw is I turned to Theresa and said, is it all right if I do a point of order? She's like, go for it. It was a real girl power thing. And everyone just sat there like, yes, Bercow. And his face was a picture, have to say. The
journalists, us in the press gallery, were leaning over the barrack. No, thinking the one time he can't tell us off for leaning over like we're at a football match to try and see his face.
But he was blustering, that kind of saying, what on earth does that mean? But he was like, it was so funny. He was just speechless. It was just brilliant.
Do you think, partly because of sort of Twitter, he became a sort of Twitter fanboy, but also He sort of disappeared out of the debate now. Does he bear some responsibility for how long Brexit took?
Oh, completely. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I mean, as leader of the Commons and as an MP, I have always held the line that you have to respect the chair. But yeah, I mean, there is a
You're not an MP anymore, so you can say what you like.
I can say what I like, exactly. Yeah. And the fact is that he was partial. He was definitely partial. He was partial towards individuals, and as I had that many people come to me, some in tears, saying he never calls me because he says I waffled on or I did something wrong. And people would be terrified. It's so humiliating. He would say things that you look more ridiculous than usual, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. Or people think that we care what the honourable gentleman thinks. And the fact is we don't. And it was just awful, awful, awful bullying from the chair. And yeah, I loathed it. I loathe bullies. And so, yeah, I can say that now. This is great to be saying this. Thanks, Matt.
No, it's good. It's all therapy.
Yeah, when are we meeting again?
We've talked weekly. Well, we've both got time on our hands.
Marvellous.
You've talked a bit about some of the things you've achieved and the things you were working on and that sort of thing. But what was the part of the job, MP or minister, that you enjoyed the least?
Well,
or maybe it's not unconnected to the last conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the job I loved most was leader of the Commons, and I loved that team of civil servants that supported me there. And whilst all of my teams have been completely brilliant as a minister, and I would never say anything against the civil service as a group, because I think they have an incredibly hard job and they do it very well. But I think one of the bits I've enjoyed least about being a minister is that the civil service theoretically provides the corporate memory, the expertise, the sound advice, and then the minister comes along with the sort of political overlay and says, yeah, of these three options, 1, 2 and 3, I'm going with 2 because politically that's a bigger win, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, that is not how the civil service works. And whether it did once and just doesn't now, but the reality for so many civil servants is if they want to gain and develop expertise in the job, they can't if they want a pay rise or a promotion. So what happens is you get brilliant civil servants who come into the job, spend 6 months or a year in the job, and then to get a pay rise or a promotion, they have to move team.
So they go to a different department.
They go to a different department.
They go from health to environment. Yeah.
So they've been doing dentistry, and then they go to transport to do bike lanes. It's completely bonkers. So my big ask in stepping down is civil service, please allow people to be promoted and get a pay rise in role. Let them build up the expertise. I just find it extraordinary that's not the case. And a perfect example for me as minister with the dental recovery plan is, I've learnt over the years through ministerial roles is that you have to hit the ground running. You have to know within a month what it is you're going to prioritise, and then you have to hammer away and get it done. And so with the dental recovery plan coming in November, we announced the dental recovery plan in February the 7th, I think, like two and a bit months later, with Christmas in between, because I could see this is the burning platform. We've got to get this done. And, and that shouldn't be like that. You should be much better able to provide that sort of continuity and that upscaling because you've got the right team, and it should be much more continuous than it is.
It's really interesting that. What would be your advice to a new minister then coming in? Were there to be a change or a reshuffle?
So, I mean, I'm absolutely willing to talk to anybody who's coming in, whether they're of any party, about the priorities that I was working on in as a minister. So now,
you particularly because on the baby's front or the teeth.
Yeah.
If Keir Starmer or Wes Streeting said to you, come in, do some work for us, you would?
Well, I've already said on air many times I like Wes Streeting, and he says, no, don't say that. That will destroy my career. Leadsom likes me. But no, I mean, genuinely, I've talked to him about the Start for Life, and he absolutely is, he says that he would continue with that. But, it is politics. It's very difficult for one party to continue. In my manifesto, we are committing to roll out family hubs across England, which is so important. It's really going to be life-changing for millions of families, and that's really, really important. But no, I think so
if Wes Streeting said, come and do the Leadsom review of early years, you would do that?
Yeah, for the sake of
it's
all
something you've
those
worked on for a long
families.
time,
Yes, I would do, but I don't think he'll ask me. By the way,
Well, we'll wait and see. Well, obviously it doesn't
we'll
matter
see. You
because
can
Victoria
ask him.
Atkins is still going to be health secretary.
She is,
you
absolutely.
were about to say.
Yeah.
Would you recommend being an MP to a friend or someone you cared about?
Absolutely. You know, I think the thing I would say to anyone wanting to be an MP is be clear about what it is you want to do. So I had my 3 Bs, babies, banks and Brussels, and I was quite clear that was what I was going to pursue. And, you know, I've sort of gone slightly around the houses at times with, but ultimately, you know, I'm stepping down thinking those are the things I set out to do, and to a large extent I've done them. I think, you know, Ian Duncan Smith, I think it was, who said some people go into politics to be someone, others go into politics to do something. Be the person who has something that they want to do and know what that thing is. So that's what I would say. But equally, I would say it's a huge privilege. You know, I have loved representing South Northamptonshire. You know, one of the best things about being an MP is that magic wand, which is the House of Commons letterhead. So somebody comes to you with an intractable problem that's been going on for years or months, or desperate need for healthcare, or, you know, for benefits to be resolved, or for, you know, as a veteran, or whatever it might be, and you can fix those things for them, and that is so satisfying. And the lovely thing is, for me, in stepping down, is the number of thank yous from people who, you know, who say, you helped me back in 2012, and I'm like, great, I'm so pleased, and so pleased that you remember. So yeah, that is the lovely privilege about the job.
And so when you were, if you were a new MP of any party, arriving day after or a few days after the election, arriving into Westminster, what advice would you give them on, you know, I don't know whether it's the best place for a cup of tea, or the best way to get a decent office, or who to sidle up to first, how to get around the whips. What's your best advice?
Yeah, so be friends with the whips. You know, the whips are there to make sure that you vote with the party. And that's really important. But at the same time, they're there to help you and support you. So actually, being good mates with your whip is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, very good. Finally then, Andrea Leadsom, last standard question for your exit interview. What will you do next?
Well, I really want to focus on early years. So before the election was called, I was working on a private members bill, which was about government providing information to all families on what the government is doing each year to improve support for families who are having new babies. I wanted to see that as a prototype for other countries around the world. And so, you know, I really want to get that private members bill through, whoever's in office. And if it's a Conservative government, I know we will get that through again. And then I would like to set off around the world persuading other countries to give much better support to babies through that critical period from pregnancy to age 2.
Fantastic. Well, Andrea Leadsom, thank you so much. Not just for this, but all the other interviews you've done with me over the years, and occasional off-the-record lunch as well, which is always a lot of fun.
And the French martini we had on stage.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great days. Andrea Leadsom, thanks so much for joining us for your exit interview.
Thank you.